The first rays of dawn crept over Maple Grove's historic cemetery, casting long shadows across weathered tombstones that had stood sentinel for over a century. Michael Thompson's hands trembled as he stared in disbelief at the devastation before him. Yellow construction tape fluttered like vultures' wings around what was once a meticulously maintained burial ground, a sacred space that had preserved the memories of generations. Mud-caked bulldozers sat menacingly at the edge of the plot, their metal teeth having already torn huge gashes into the hallowed ground. Tombstones lay toppled like broken soldiers, some dating back to the Civil War era, now carelessly scattered across the torn earth. The ground was a nightmare of churned soil, exposed roots, and fragments of memory. Headstones cracked, memorial wreaths trampled, and centuries of local history obliterated in what could only be described as a calculated act of destruction. Michael knew exactly who was responsible: Karen Reynolds, the most ruthless and power-hungry member of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. Her ambition was an open secret in their small community, a woman who viewed every inch of local land as a potential development opportunity, regardless of its historical significance. He remembered the heated HOA meeting just 2 weeks ago. Karen had presented her community expansion plan with a predatory smile, her manicured fingers tracing a map that would transform the old cemetery into a new community center and additional housing plots. Most board members had listened politely, but Michael had been the lone voice of opposition. "This isn't just land," he had argued, his voice rising with passion. "These are the final resting places of our town's founders. My great-great-grandfather is buried here. My family has been part of Maple Grove for 6 generations." Karen had merely rolled her eyes, her response dripping with condescension. "Historical sentimentality isn't a valid urban planning strategy, Michael. Progress requires tough decisions." Now standing amidst the destruction, Michael realized those weren't just words, they were a declaration of war. The preliminary work had clearly begun without any official permits, without any community consultation. Dirt-covered survey stakes marked new property lines, suggesting this was more than just a proposal. This was a fait accompli. His mind raced through potential legal strategies. As a corporate attorney specializing in land use litigation, Michael wasn't just angry, he was prepared. The desecration of this cemetery wasn't just a personal affront, it was a potential violation of multiple state and federal preservation laws. The morning air was thick with the scent of disturbed earth and freshly crushed memories. Nearby, a single marble headstone, miraculously intact, caught the sunlight. It belonged to Elizabeth Carrington, a local school teacher from the late 1800s. The inscription read, "She who remembers shall never truly be forgotten." Michael clenched his fists. Karen might have destroyed the physical ground, but she would not erase the memories. Not if he had anything to do with it. This was more than a fight over land. This was a battle for the soul of Maple Grove, and Michael was about to make Karen understand the true meaning of consequences. The next 48 hours became a whirlwind of legal research and strategic planning. Michael's home office transformed into a war room, every surface covered with historical documents, local ordinances, and preservation statutes. His wife, Alina, a historical preservation specialist at the State Museum, brought her own considerable expertise to the fight. "This isn't just about one cemetery," Alina explained, spreading out a series of maps and historical surveys. "Maple Grove Cemetery is one of the oldest in the county. It contains graves of Revolutionary War veterans, early settlers, and local civil rights pioneers. What Karen's doing is essentially erasing our community's foundational history." Michael's laptop screen flickered with emails to historical preservation societies, local historians, and potential expert witnesses. He'd already contacted the state's Historical Preservation Office and begun compiling a comprehensive documentation of the damage. Digital photographs captured every inch of the destroyed burial ground. Each toppled headstone, each disturbed plot of earth would become evidence. His first strategic move came through an emergency injunction. By midday, he had filed paperwork with the local court, requesting an immediate halt to all construction activities. The documents were meticulously prepared, citing multiple violations: unauthorized destruction of a historical site, potential desecration of burial grounds, and complete disregard for local preservation ordinances. Karen, however, was not one to back down easily. Within hours of Michael's filing, her legal team responded with a counter-argument. They claimed the cemetery had been abandoned and was no longer an active burial ground, arguing that the HOA had the right to repurpose the land for community development. But Michael had anticipated this. Elena had uncovered crucial documentation proving that the last burial in the cemetery was less than 30 years ago, well within legal protection statutes. Moreover, they found records showing that the land had been specifically deeded to the community as a perpetual memorial site by its original donors. The local newspaper caught wind of the story, and suddenly, Michael's quiet legal battle became a community flashpoint. Local history buffs, elderly residents whose ancestors were buried in the cemetery, and preservation activists began to rally behind him. Social media erupted with support, sharing historical photographs and personal stories connected to the cemetery. Karen's typical bulldozer approach was meeting unexpected resistance. The HOA board, which had previously been sympathetic to her development plans, now began to splinter. Some members were horrified by the extent of the destruction, realizing the potential legal and public relations nightmare they were facing. Late one night, as Michael pored over legal briefs, Alina brought him a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "You're not just fighting for a piece of land," she said softly. "You're fighting for the story of an entire community." Michael nodded, the weight of generations resting on his shoulders. This was about more than winning a legal battle. This was about preserving memory, about respecting the lives that had built their town, about showing that some things are more valuable than profit margins and development plans. The legal war was just beginning, and Michael was preparing for a fight that would shake Maple Grove to its very foundations. The courthouse hearing was scheduled for a crisp Tuesday morning, and Michael knew this would be the first major battlefield in his war against Karen and the HOA. What he didn't expect was the cavalry that would ride in to support his cause. Dr. Margaret Holbrook, the county's most respected historian, arrived with a meticulously prepared report that would become a turning point. At 72, she was a formidable presence. Her silver hair pulled back, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, and a file of documentation that stretched nearly a foot thick. "This isn't just about a piece of land," Dr. Holbrook testified, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a surgical instrument. "This cemetery is a living historical document. Each headstone tells a story of Maple Grove's evolution, from its earliest settlers to its most recent guardians of memory." Her testimony revealed something Michael hadn't fully appreciated. The cemetery contained the only remaining intact burial ground for several of the town's founding families, including a section dedicated to African-American residents from the early 1900s, a community often overlooked in local historical narratives. But the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. Jack Reynolds, Karen's own husband, had quietly reached out to Michael the week before the hearing. Tired of his wife's relentless pursuit of development at any cost, Jack provided internal HOA documents that proved Karen had deliberately concealed several key historical surveys that would have immediately halted the cemetery's destruction. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Jack took the stand. His testimony was devastating. He described how Karen had manipulated HOA board meetings, suppressed historical documentation, and even bribed a local county official to expedite demolition permits. "She's always been about the bottom line," Jack said, his voice breaking slightly. "But this was different. This was erasing our town's history for a few extra housing lots." Michael watched Karen's face as the evidence mounted. Her trademark composure began to crack, revealing the desperation beneath her carefully constructed exterior. This was no longer just a zoning dispute, it had become an exposure of systemic corruption. The local press had packed the courtroom. Reporters from 3 different news networks scribbled notes furiously, smartphones capturing every moment. What had started as a local dispute was becoming a national story about preservation, community, and the price of unchecked development. Alina sat in the front row, her hand clasped tightly around a leather-bound book, a comprehensive genealogical record of Maple Grove's families that she had spent years compiling. Each page was a testament to the lives that would have been erased by Karen's bulldozers. As the first day of hearings concluded, Michael knew they had struck a significant blow. The judge's initial comments suggested serious concerns about the HOA's actions. Temporary restraining orders were issued, effectively halting all construction activities. But Michael wasn't naive. Karen was not the type to go down without a fight. This was merely the first skirmish in what promised to be a protracted legal battle. That evening, as Michael and Elena reviewed the day's events, a sense of cautious optimism filled their home. The cemetery, their community's memory, had been given a fighting chance. But the war was far from over. Karen Reynolds was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. In the weeks following the initial court hearing, she launched a calculated counteroffensive that would test Michael's resolve to its absolute limits. First came the personal attacks. Anonymous complaints were filed with Michael's law firm, questioning his professional conduct. Mysterious phone calls to his partners suggested he was using company resources for a personal vendetta. The whisper campaign was subtle but insidious, designed to create professional pressure that might force him to back down. Then the HOA began a more direct approach. They filed a countersuit claiming Michael's actions were causing financial damages to the community development project. The lawsuit sought damages in the millions, a clear attempt to intimidate him financially. Medical bills from Alina's recent cancer treatment and their daughter's college tuition suddenly felt like additional pressure points. But Michael had anticipated this. The community support that had emerged during the court hearings had transformed into something more substantial. Local businesses began offering pro bono services. The Historical Society set up the Legal Defense Fund. Even Jack Reynolds, now fully estranged from Karen, provided critical insider information about her development strategies. Dr. Margaret Holbrook uncovered the most damning evidence yet. Through extensive research, she proved that the cemetery land was protected by a century-old deed that explicitly prohibited its sale or development. Karen had overlooked a critical legal document, a mistake that would prove to be her fatal error. The turning point came from an unexpected source. A young journalist named Aria Rodriguez, working for a regional investigative news outlet, began digging deeper into Karen's past development projects. Her research revealed a pattern of similar land grabs, each carefully orchestrated to circumvent historical preservation laws. One particularly explosive discovery showed that Karen had been working with a development consortium that had a history of controversial land acquisitions. Phone records and email trails suggested a network of corrupt local officials who had been facilitating these land deals for years. Michael realized this was no longer just about saving a cemetery. This had become an exposure of a systemic problem of local government corruption. The HOA's aggressive tactics backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating Michael, they had united the community against them. Town hall meetings were packed. Local veterans groups, historical societies, and community activists all rallied behind Michael's cause. Jack Reynolds became a crucial witness, providing internal documents that showed Karen had knowingly violated multiple local and state regulations. His testimony was a knife to the heart of her defense, revealing years of calculated manipulation. As the legal battle intensified, Michael understood the true stakes. This was about more than land or development. This was about preserving community memory, about protecting the stories of those who came before, about standing up against unchecked corporate greed. Elena watched her husband with a mixture of pride and concern. She knew the toll this was taking, the late nights, the constant stress, the personal and professional risks. But she also knew Michael was fighting for something far more important than himself. The final legal showdown was approaching. Michael could feel it. Everything they had worked for, everything they believed in, was about to be put to the ultimate test. The final hearing was nothing short of a judicial tsunami. What had begun as a local dispute about a small cemetery had transformed into a landmark case that would be studied in law schools for years to come. Judge Elizabeth Ramirez, known for her meticulous approach to complex legal matters, listened intently as the full scope of Karen's actions unfolded. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with additional spectators lined up outside, watching a live video feed. Michael's closing argument was a masterpiece of legal and moral reasoning. He wasn't just presenting a case. He was telling the story of Maple Grove, of its people, its history, its soul. Photographs of the damaged cemetery were projected behind him, each image a testament to the destruction wrought by unchecked development. "This isn't about a piece of land," Michael declared, his voice steady and powerful. "This is about the promise we make to those who came before us. Every tombstone is a story. Every grave is a commitment to remember, to honor, to preserve." The evidence was overwhelming. Jack Reynolds' testimony, Dr. Holbrook's historical documentation, and Aria Rodriguez's investigative reporting had created an ironclad case. The development consortium Karen had been working with was exposed as a network of corrupt developers who had been systematically targeting historical sites for profit. When the verdict came, it was comprehensive and decisive. Karen was found guilty of multiple violations: fraud, deliberate destruction of historical property, conspiracy to circumvent preservation laws. The HOA was ordered to fully restore the cemetery, with each tombstone to be carefully replaced, the ground meticulously reconstructed to its original state. But the victory was about more than legal vindication. The case sparked a statewide review of land development practices. New laws were proposed to provide stronger protections for historical sites, with stricter penalties for those who would willfully destroy community heritage. Karen's professional reputation was destroyed. Her development firm collapsed, her professional licenses were revoked, and she faced significant financial penalties. The once powerful HOA board was completely restructured, with new members committed to community preservation. The cemetery restoration became a community project. Volunteers from across Maple Grove came together, cleaning, researching, restoring. Elementary school children helped map grave sites. Local historians conducted research. It became a living memorial, not just to those buried there, but to the community's ability to come together and protect its history. Dr. Holbrook oversaw much of the restoration, ensuring each tombstone was treated with the utmost respect. Jack Reynolds, seeking redemption, became a key supporter of the project, donating significant personal funds to the restoration effort. Years later, the cemetery became a protected historical site, a place of reflection, education, and community pride. Michael and Elena would often walk there, their grandchildren listening to stories of how one person's determination could protect an entire community's memory. As the sun set on Maple Grove, casting long shadows across the carefully restored tombstones, it was clear that some victories transcend the courtroom. Some fights are about more than winning. They're about remembering, about justice, about honoring the stories that shape us. The cemetery stood as a testament, not to Karen's destructive ambition, but to the power of community, preservation, and unwavering moral courage.